We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse's Phil Brasher, as well as this week by House Science Committee Ranking Member Frank Lucas, also a former chair of the House Agriculture Committee. Congressman Lucas, we appreciate you joining us.
Pleasure to be with you here, and the most interesting of times to visit right now, too, on a whole variety of issues.
That's certainly one way to put it. Perhaps quite an understatement there. But the thing that's really had Capitol Hill's attention over the course of this entire week has been sort of a will they or won't they on negotiations over coronavirus relief. I should preface this by saying we're having this conversation on Friday morning because it seems like it's a really evolving situation. But as you sit in that chair right now, what do you think are the general prospects for coronavirus relief legislation to reach some kind of agreement that will enable it to move it across Capitol Hill?
Sadly, I'm pessimistic, and I look across my district and I see the impact on businesses, and we're already under pressure in the ag industry, and I know that well in the 3rd District of Oklahoma. The oil and gas industry is under pressure. Those Main Street businesses are under pressure. Being able to help get us to the point where a vaccine that is effective and readily available is out there. That's how we ultimately overcome this. Getting to that point is critically important to me. When we've got $134, $35 billion left in the Paycheck Protection Program, probably the best thing that's come along to fight this kind of a short-term economic catastrophe. It's just sitting there. It's heartbreaking to me. So I think we need a CARES 2 package. I think it needs to be a clean package, and we've done that before. My problem is I'm not the lead negotiator, and this has been a situation where the Speaker of the United States House and essentially the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Mnuchin, and the Chief of Staff at the White House, Mr. Meadows, have been working through this. I can't speak for their negotiating skills, but I will say I've observed the Speaker's interesting negotiating skills for a long time, and that just makes me a bit pessimistic. But as we speak, and you alluded to the fact this is Friday morning, we're about to cast a couple of votes on some less than exciting or economically relevant pieces of legislation, and we're all going to go home, at least I hope. If something works out, Speaker can call us back. We stand subject to the call of the chair always anymore, but don't hold your breath. And that's a tough thing for me to say, considering the people back home, not just in Oklahoma, but across the country, who are having a tough time trying to make their way through this. But it's almost as though the Speaker overplayed her hand, asked for too much, and demanded too many of her conference's particular projects, and found that the White House and perhaps the Senate didn't agree with her. And now she's got to untangle from those failed negotiations. It's just tough. And it's how many days till a general election? The president, a third of the Senate, the entire House. You've heard me both refer to as the presidential silly season every 4 years, and we're in the midst of all that. So I never give up hope. I'm a farmer. I put the wheat in the ground because I expect to raise a crop. The glass is always half full. It's never half empty. But I'm not holding my breath.
Congressman, one thing Congress did get done this week is pass a congressional resolution to keep the government funded through December 11th. And included in there is a provision to replenish the Commodity Credit Corporation account that USDA has been using for coronavirus relief payments, trade assistance, and of course, it's the account that they use to make all the commodity program payments, conservation program payments, so forth. What kind of unfinished business does this leave in terms of needs out there in the country related to this? There are a number of provisions in the House bill. The Senate coronavirus bill had some provisions as well. What do you see as the critical needs that USDA can't address on their own?
I think there are a number of issues that have come to the top as we've gone through this tumultuous year that have demonstrated flaws and weaknesses in the supply chain, in the food chain, from producers all the way to consumers. When you consider that most of our ag producers in virtually every commodity, whether it's livestock or crop or fiber, if you're the raw producer, you've been hammered at every step of the way. As the supply chain creaked to a halt, as we had, for instance, packing plants in the United States in the beef and pork and other poultry industry have to slow down or shut down temporarily at times, it basically destroyed the price basis out there for many of us, and we're only starting to crawl a little bit out of that. At the same time, the consumer, who, in fairness, probably had been spoiled by how successful this just-in-time supply chain has worked, perhaps didn't necessarily always appreciate really how affordable their food was, suddenly discovered that when, for instance, in beef, maybe half the product was being processed and packaged to go to restaurants versus home consumption, and all of a sudden you couldn't go to a restaurant in much of America, and those supplies in the warehouses and in the supply stream couldn't be broke up to be repackaged. You know, I buy a pound or two of hamburger at a time at my house. I don't buy 50 or 150 pounds of hamburger. Suddenly they saw the product that they needed, they wanted, they could utilize, become, in many cases, almost unavailable. The prices exploded. It demonstrated how perilous, in some ways, our super efficient to model has become. And there's legislation out there that Dusty Johnson and I have worked on. Other issues I've worked with Colin Peterson on, Congresswoman Fudge on, to try and fundamentally address how the system works. And for instance, if you bear with me, Congresswoman Fudge and I have a bill to incorporate something called CFIUS. It's the entity since the 1970s that's overseen foreign acquisition of major pieces of the economy in the United States. Most people tend to think of the defense related stuff, satellites, manufacturing, that sort of thing. We want to incorporate the food supply as a part of that national security interest, and to make the Secretary of Agriculture a permanent member of the board, with the logic that it's just too important that you could literally have one entity outside of the United States acquire a big part of the food supply chain, and if they have problems, then turn around and sell perhaps what people would describe as our adversaries, and have our adversaries wind up controlling a key part of, for instance, the protein strain. We're not saying that it's inappropriate that everyone have the option to acquire assets they need, but we need to make sure that this doesn't get out of control, because not everybody around the world has our best interest. There's things out there that I've worked on trying to expand the availability of USDA inspection to small and intermediate sized facilities. Because let's be honest, a meat inspector from the state of Oklahoma at a facility, when he or she puts their mark on a product, it's just as good as USDA, just as good. But if you're going to sell that product processed in Oklahoma across state lines, or even potentially in international markets, you got to have that USDA stamp. So how do we make those inspectors more available? How do we make the costs such that littler facilities can utilize it? There's been things where we've worked on the grant program to try and enable smaller facilities to not just have access to the inspectors, but to upgrade their facilities to meet that standard. And by the way, the state of Oklahoma used part of its COVID money to set up a grant program along the same lines. So we're doing this in Oklahoma. Create more opportunities to move product through the food supply chain, a more consistent supply. Now, are the big super plants the most cost effective? Of course they are. But as we saw with the fire in Colorado not long ago, before COVID-19, as we've seen with COVID-19 now, when you have some plants that produce 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5% of a particular product in the United States, and they either have to slow the chain down or drop shifts or adjust their production schedule, it just sets off the most amazing thing. And not just that, I'm also working with Dusty on language about how to better enable producers to learn how to utilize the tools in the market to protect themselves. whether it's hedging or other items. The big operators have done this for years. The little operators, there are opportunities, but they need to understand and be comfortable with what they're doing. So there's all those kind of things out there. But that gets at the fundamental nature of the supply chain, and whether we can get some or all of that ultimately in legislation before the end of this year, or it's something we have to address after the first of the year. The problems that COVID-19 had brought to the surface aren't going away. We're just as susceptible as we were the day of the Hokum fire in Colorado. And it's not fair to producers or consumers if we don't take action to avoid future economic calamities.
I want to ask you to look forward on a couple of other issues as well. One is the farm economy broadly. As you will know, well, it looks like government payments this year are going to amount to about 40% of net farm income, and all of the economic forecasts are projecting that commodity markets are going to be probably down again next year. Is Congress going to have to step in, or is the USDA going to have to step in next year to shore up farm income yet again?
I think we'll know when we cross that bridge. Right now, the existing programs have worked reasonably well, and I give President Trump credit, whether it had to do with the issues brought on by the trade wars around the world or now COVID-19. He's responded really quite nicely. That's why that $30 billion needed to be 28, whatever was needed to plus back up to the $30 billion account was so necessary. He has demonstrated a willingness to work with rural America. I don't see the economy permanently becoming functional again until we get the COVID-19 under control. I'm ranking member on the science committee. There are 7 approximately vaccines now that are in the 3rd stage process in one form or another. There's another 130 something out there being worked on around the world. I was in a meeting a week ago Monday with the Secretary of HHS, Mr. Azar, and he basically said under our health regime, it may be 3 days, it may be 3 weeks, heaven forbid it's 3 months, but we're getting close. I mean, they're making vaccine on the 3 top formulas. So you have to get that out into the system to get the economy moving again. Now, ag-related issues. We're caught in a squeeze from several directions. We went through the super drought of 11 through 14. Prices were artificially driven up. You remember the demand from many of my friends out there that we weren't ever going to have the full number of CRP acres authorized, and therefore, they squeezed us in the budget in the 14 Farm Bill, and we adjusted the CRP acres to reflect what we thought would be utilized. We actually hit it pretty close, and then took that money and put it into the crop insurance and the other commodity titles. Mr. Peterson then and Mr. Conaway in the 2018 Farm Bill adjusted back, acknowledging that extra production had driven down prices. We're still in a rebalancing there. It's just a heck of a situation when you consider we had artificially high prices because of a drought. It drove producers to make decisions that probably weren't long-term rational, but they were responding to the market signals they were seeing. And then now, as we normally would have been working through corrections on production, we get slammed with COVID-19, where the consumers are saying at one point, you want $20 for a roast? And my cattlemen are saying back home, you want to give me $1.25 for my calf pound? We're working through all that. That's what the safety net's there for. That's why we have to have a farm bill. We'll see what the administration looks like next year. It is a presidential year. I know how my district's going to vote. I know how my state's going to vote. I'm not sure about the country. I'm not sure who the next Secretary of Ag will be. But if it's not Sonny Perdue, I'm going to miss him.
I wanted you to put your science committee hat on back real quickly. If Democrats have taken control of the White House and the Senate, they've made clear that climate legislation is going to be a top priority. What role do you think agriculture should play in such legislation, and how should farmers prepare for that?
We are the stewards of the soil. We are the stewards of the air. We are the protectors of clean water. And we have been always, and we always will be. I would hope whatever administration is in charge next year that if they decide to pursue, quote, an aggressive agenda, they adopt the carrot approach, incentive-driven policy change as opposed to the stick. That remains to be seen. My producers, my neighbors, I want to do the right thing on my farm, but I have to do it in a way that enables me to make a living and to be competitive with the rest of the world, where maybe they don't necessarily do that in places like Brazil or China or other spots around the world. Whether it's my platform on the science committee or working with all my Aggie friends nonstop, when we get there, we'll fight the battles we fight. But they've got to, if you have a new taskmaster at the White House, they've got to be careful. You've both heard me say many times before, there's a fine line pointed out to me years ago. There's a fine line between doing things for your constituents and doing them to your constituents. If they send edicts down, if they tell us we can't do things, if they want to take things away from us because we don't farm the way they want us to farm in Washington, D.C., or New York City, or Seattle, then they will pay a huge price on the next election day. I just have to make sure my farmers and ranchers in my small communities and my little processors and my little packers are still economically alive by the time we get to that next election day.
Congressman, I want to wrap up kind of circling back on something you said in response to one of Phil's earlier questions, specifically the mention that you offered to the bill that you worked on, you and a number of others worked on with Congressman Johnson that was dropped yesterday. In there, we saw something, not necessarily identical legislation, but we saw Senator Fisher dropped something last week to try and offer a number of fixes to the cattle industry. We've seen a number of pieces of legislation to offer these fixes, but these are efforts that have been ongoing for a while. And I know I'm not telling you anything when I say that in the agriculture industry, known for its circular firing squads, cattle politics is probably one of the ones with better aim. They really like to go after each other.
Absolutely.
I wonder, does the coronavirus provide the impetus for the level of change that we're seeing sought after in some of these pieces of legislation? Or, I mean, is this going to be enough, or are these old fights going to prove to be looming just too large?
Only time will tell. The Holcomb fire was an example of the distortions that appeared in the market because of this just-in-time, tightly controlled supply chain. My producers understood what was going on. And they said so at the time, and they still say so. Consumers, on the other hand, never really had a chance to understand what one facility going down, why that would affect them the way it did. But with COVID-19, it is so graphic, and it is across so many lines of food, it's hard to ignore. But you're exactly right. The biggest challenge I've found in my life in this place is producers, consumers have many things in common. And part of that is they have not a particularly long time frame of reference or focus or attention. If prices get better quickly, then they're less likely to demand real change. I'm not going to say dramatic change, but real structural change. But right now, between the economy and the COVID stuff, and until there's a vaccine that's sufficiently effective and readily available, millions of doses, not hundreds of millions of doses, I should say, not millions. I don't see this changing dramatically. So we have an emphasis here, a focus from folks on both ends of the supply chain. Just maybe we can make some real changes, and everybody will benefit from it in the long run. Everybody.
Well, obviously, there's a number of different things we could talk about on a wide range of farm policy subjects, but also want to be mindful of your time as well as the time of our viewers. So I think we're gonna put a lid on the conversation for today. But Congressman Lucas, we hope you'll come back and join us again sometime for another round.
Absolutely. I look forward to it, gentlemen.
For Congressman Frank Lucas and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.